So this chapter will be a general overview of what we will be covering throughout the entire semester. And really, I want you to view this chapter as just kind of setting the tone of what environmental economics is, what type of problem can we solve, and how, what's the philosophy of our approach to these problems. So I'd like to begin with these two very broad questions. There's no definitive answer that we will give to these two questions, but I would just like to have you guys think about these two questions, and with every chapter, with every approach that we will take, this is the kind of the underlining theme that we will have in our mind, right? Now, here is a quote by a former U.S. president. A change in our climate is taking place very sensibly. Both heat and cold are becoming much more moderate within the memory of the middle-aged. Snow are less frequent and less deep. The rivers, which then seldom fail to freeze over in the course of the winter, scarcely ever do so now. Now, what do you think he is talking about? Right? Clearly, he's talking about the climate. Right? Who do you think this president is? Right? This was Thomas Jefferson, 1799. And Thomas Jefferson was one of not only one of the early founders, early presidents, but also one of the first climate scientists. He kept detailed records of temperature change throughout the seasons for many, many years. Right? And what motivated him to start paying attention to the climate was the deforestation, the environmental destruction that he was witnessing during the early frontier days of the United States. Right? And this is a story that is common in every developed country. Right? That you can look at the Great Britain, you can look at Germany, you can look at all these developed countries where in the beginning there has been always been massive deforestation, a massive environmental destruction. Here, fast forward to the 1970s, things are still not looking too good. So here's some pictures regarding air quality for the 1970s. Right? Here's the smoke from burning out automobile batteries. This picture, right, is in northern Birmingham. It's supposed to be during the day. This is supposed to be a sunny day. However, the city is covered in smog. So that is not a cloudy sky. That is just smog from pollution from the factories nearby. Right? And then we have just one more picture here. This is Cleveland, Ohio. Right? And this is again during the middle of the day. It's supposed to be sunny. It's supposed to have clear sky, but the smog just concentrated over the city. Right? So from the starting of the nation all the way to the 1970s, right, we have these environmental degradation. Okay. Now, but something's changed, right, around the 70s. So if there's an origin to the U.S. environmental movement, then this is the starting place. Right? So, The Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, published in 1962. Right? And this along with her congressional testimony a year later, basically kick off the environmental movement. So the book was exposing the hazard and the degradation done by DDT. So DDT is the pesticide that we have used globally to combat mosquitoes. Right? Just by the way, every influential character will definitely have their critics. And so I thought I introduced a link here. You can access it when you look at the slides. And this is a good a short report on for those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about her work. Now, 1970, and then so from that, now from the book and from her work, she really made the public aware of the environmental damages, not just to pesticide, but also just a variety of environmental quality issues. Right? And so from that, the people were ready. right, if you can say it like that. And we founded the Environmental Protection Agency. So 1970, established by Richard Nixon, right? And here is its mission statement. And I'd just like to note that I am not a big fan of memorizing dates, so I will never ask you what year certain things happen, what a certain act, a certain policy. Right? What I want to do here is just to give you some basic sense of timeline, right? What's happening in our society across around this time, okay? And so the first act from the EPA was the Clean Air Act. Okay, and we'll talk deeper about Clean Air Act when we get to Chapter 8 and Chapter 13. We'll talk more about the policy that were enacted around this time and what made it so successful in combating air pollution issues. Okay, but then there wasn't just air, right? There was a Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and so on. And so from the 70s to the 90s, it was largely cleaning up the local environment. Okay, from 90 on. From 90 on, the U.S. and the international effort kind of switch away from clean air and clean water into climate change. Okay? And so the UN founded the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCC, and founded in March of 1994. The membership at the time was 197 countries. Ultimate objective, stabilize greenhouse gas concentration. Okay? And it set up the annual meeting, right? Conference, we call it the Conference of the Parties, or COP for short. Right? And this is where international leaders, global leaders get together and try to discuss how to combat climate change. Right? All right. So every major agreement, every major meeting that you've heard, right, comes. Is one of these COPs. So, for example, the Kyoto Protocol was the first major operation, COP 3. So this is the third meeting. This was established in the third meeting that they had. Right? It operationalized the objectives of UNFCC. Okay. We'll talk more. We'll talk deeper in chapter 13 about these international efforts. The basic idea of the UNFCC is that wealthy nations, so you take North America, European countries, and it's saying, look, you guys got wealthy because you polluted so much in the past, right? That was the trade-off. The U.S., for example, right, has long been the number one emitter of CO2 emissions for decades, right? And so then the responsibility, the burden of reducing emission then should fall more on these industrialized countries. So here is the 37 industrialized countries. Furthermore, these industrialized countries has an obligation to provide financial incentive, financial subsidies to help developing nations. Right? One, to sustain economic growth, and two, to do it without the same level of emission that these industrialized countries have done in the past. Right? Okay. The most recent COP21 established the Paris Agreement, right? Adopted in December of 2015, and which unfortunately, right, the U.S. withdrew in 2016 under Donald Trump. We officially withdrew. These things always takes a while. We officially withdrew in November of 2019. With the current administration, right, we'll see how much. It is expected that we will rejoin the Paris Agreement. How much of a commitment we will commit, that remain to be seen. The objective, right, is a little bit more specific, is limiting global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. Okay. We will cover this more in chapter 13. Okay. Now, why am I bringing this up? What's the point here, right? So we said that from the founding of this nation back in the late 1700s, all the way to 1970, right? Environmental degradation has been increasing. Right? However, since the 70s, we made a lot of progress, right, into cleaning up our environment. Okay, have they worked? Well, here's a quick snapshot of New York City, 1973 to 2013. Okay, and this is just one example, one area, but we can clearly see that we made tremendous progress. Okay, if we look at some other pollutants, right, and this graph is just from 1990 to 2016, so not even that long, right, of a time period. So what I mean is you can imagine that if I had the chart going back further, the pollution would be much higher, right? But we have made tremendous progress lowering emission, right, and well below the national standard level set. You can see all the important pollutants, right, has decreased tremendously. Okay, now the earlier question that I asked you guys to think about is this trade-off between environmental degradation and economic development. Like, what is the trade-off? And what is the relationship between GDP and environmental quality? Right? And in the past, the common way of thinking is the relationship is linear, meaning that if you want economic growth, then you will need to degrade the environment. Right? However, since the 70s, right, we're seeing that what it showed us is that it is possible to grow the economy, right, and increase the living standard, because I don't have to show you a chart, but I think it's clear to see that the living standards, right, and the economic growth of the United States from the 70s until now, right, has been consistently increasing. Right? So we don't have to make that sacrifice. Now, is this true for all environmental qualities? Is this true for all pollutions? Maybe, maybe not, right? But at least there's enough evidence here to challenge kind of the old way of thinking that the environment and economic growth are always have to compete against each other. Okay. Now, is there a theory that we can use to explain this? Well, yes. Right. So let me present to you the environmental Kuznets hypothesis. Now, Kuznets was an economist who worked on income inequality, and the original Kuznets curve dealt with income inequality, have nothing to do with environmental issues. So if you look up Kuznets, that's what you will see. But we like the curve. Environmentalists, we like the idea that this conveys, so we borrowed it and then use it for environmental issues. Right? It seems to offer an explanation, right? Or explanation to the phenomenon that we are seeing. Okay. And the hypothesis is that if we take a measurement of wealth, okay, and so income per person, income per capita, that's a pretty standard measurements of wealth, right? If we put that in the horizontal axis here, and then we put environmental degradation in the vertical over here, okay, then we can roughly break every economy into three parts. Okay, and so here in the beginning, and you can think this is in the U.S. in the founding days. Okay? As we increase growth, as we increase income, right, we degrade the environment as a trade-off. Right? So the environmental degradation increases. However, there is a turning point, right, where once we reach this called the industrial economies, right, which is the turning point where we continue with our economic growth, and yet environmental degradation decreases. Okay, so this is there, and we can call the later part the post-industrial economy, right, or the service economy. And we can see a lot of evidence of that here in the U.S. Right? We no longer have we have less major factories. Our fastest growing sectors is the tech sector. We have many more jobs that's in the service industry, right, and so on. Now, what about any data, any hard evidence about the Kuznets hypothesis? Sure. All right, we can see that. So here is sulfur dioxide. We can see here where we looked at GNP. Just think of that as GDP. So it's income per capita, income per person. Okay, and this is across many societies, and we see that we kind of see the Kuznets hypothesis forming here. Right? We see that in the lower income, the emission for SO2, sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide, by the way, it's a very harmful local pollutant. Comes from processing coal and burning coal mostly, right? And we see that we see this environmental degradation increase, right, as the income increases. However, there's clearly we can see a turning point here where economic growth continue to increase, and not only does the pollution decrease, it decreases pretty dramatically, right? It decreases decreases exponentially, at least in the beginning here, right? And so now is all environmental qualities going to follow the Kuznets curve? No. Right? And we will talk about, especially in later chapter, we talk about climate change. So climate change creates a unique problem for the Kuznets curve. Right? But the motivation here is the trade-off. What's the relationship between the trade-off of growth, economic growth, and environmental quality? Is not necessarily linear. That's my only point here. Okay.